Hi everyone and welcome. In this video we're going to talk about poetry and how to teach it in your language classroom. Before we get there, let's talk about something that is a problem for most of us, which is why are we so afraid to teach poetry? I know this was my experience, and I know that a lot of the teachers I've talked to really feel a lot of hesitation about teaching poetry to students in their class. So what is it about poetry that makes it so scary? Well, I did a little bit of research and thought about it myself, and here's what I came up with. One of the first things that happens is that we feel like we don't really have a lot of experience of poetry in our daily lives. It seems like something that, is done on a stage during an inauguration and is really this quite formal thing, right? And we don't necessarily feel that we understand poetry. There's a lot of sort of figurative language and metaphor and simile, and it becomes this kind of high art form, and it's really old-fashioned or maybe too difficult to get a hold of. So there's a lot of reasons why we feel we personally are uncomfortable with poetry, and probably why our students will hate it. Okay. So we'll talk about that. We're going to put a pin in it for a second. Let's talk about why we should teach poetry. And I stole these ideas directly from the great article by David Hanauer, so I'm going to cite that in a second. Now, David Hanauer argues it's the perfect format to teach in a language classroom. And this is for a number of reasons if you think about it. Most poems are really short. They often use the first person singular, so a really basic form of grammar, right? The basic I feel this, I like this. They're usually in the present tense, again. So overall, basic grammar, present tense, first person singular. So even students that have limited language can work with it. Most poetry uses really high frequency vocabulary, so the first 1,000 words that we use most commonly in English. You can use some visual and auditory imagery, so we get into some of the sort of look, the way things look and the way they sound. You can do rhyme and alliteration, but you don't have to. But it's a great way also when you read it out loud to hear how the language sounds. And in another article I read in Edutopia, they talk about this is very similar to the way that you first learn a language as a baby, sort of the sounds and the rhythms. It gives students a really good sense of the way that a language sounds when it's spoken. It uses emotive vocabulary, and we'll talk about that in a little while, why that's so important. It's something that really is quite powerful if we do it well. And there's the article I was talking about, Meaningful Literacy. If you'd like to go check that out, it's a great read. All right, so let's look at how to teach poetry. And the first step may surprise you, but the first step is we need to start with you. You, the teacher in the classroom, you are the person that has the most influence over whether or not students are going to love something or whether they will hate it. So here's my word of advice. Don't teach poetry unless you feel comfortable doing it. Okay? If it's something that you really want to teach and you're interested in, then the first thing you need to do is get into your own feelings about poetry. Okay? Don't bring it into the classroom until you feel like it's something interesting or exciting. So here's what I recommend for you to start doing. If you'd like to think about teaching poetry in the classroom, start by watching some poetry. There's some amazing slam poets online that you can watch, poets reading out loud for fun, and you can watch them for fun. As I said, there's some, like Taylor Mali is a really fantastic place to start. He's a former English teacher and a slam poet, and he has some great videos. The next thing you can do is read. You can start to read some poetry on your own. And if you don't have any poetry books on hand, that's totally no problem. Listen carefully to the song lyrics that you enjoy. Maybe look them up online. Read through those lyrics. Okay, and think about, why does a poem or a song really appeal to you? What is it about it? Is it the fact that it rhymes? Is it the fact that it speaks to something really deeply emotional? Is it the sort of images that they're able to present to you? What is it that makes it such a powerful poem or song for you? I'm going to encourage you also to say poetry out loud or lyrics out loud and notice the way that they sound. Poetry is, I think, best if it's spoken. And you can, as I say, hear the sounds, hear some of the rhythm, hear the structure, notice the images. And then once you really start to enjoy poetry, get curious about what the names of the techniques are. Look behind the curtain. What is it that the poets are doing that makes it so great? How did they put and craft together this really fantastic poem or this really fantastic song? And you don't have to be an expert here. Just get the sort of sense of some of the basics in poetry. And there's thousands of resources out there for you to teach you these things, little videos and teacher resources to get you started. Okay, and once you feel confident enough to just even start exploring it with the kids, here are some of the steps that we can do. All right, the second step, now that you've diffused your own fear, is to diffuse your students' fear of poetry. Okay, and we can do this in a couple of different ways. The first thing we need to do is to let the students respond to the poetry. Okay, so they're allowed to have their own emotional response. Do they like it? Do they not like it? But go a little bit beyond that. Why do they like it? Which things do they like? What is it about these poems that they like or don't like? Can they hear things, see things, notice things? There's no wrong answer. They're just, again, well-justified answers and less well-justified answers. So not just do I like it, but why do I like it? What is it about the song lyric that really speaks to me? And just like you, we're going to encourage the students to watch poets perform their poems, listen to them, speak it out loud, hear those rhythms. Again, slam poets are really amazing. There's a slam poetry competition for high school students. They can be inspired by spoken word poets. Poetry read out loud is really powerful. So this is a good way to hook them in. You can get them to listen to song lyrics too. As I say, this is a great accessible point. Most kids will say they hate poetry, but they love listening to music. So encourage them to bring in some of their own lyrics. And again, the focus before you get into any analysis or writing is to really make that emotional connection to a poem. What were they feeling when they read this poem or heard this poem? What did they enjoy? Why did they enjoy it? Really get them to make that connection emotionally. Maybe it made them feel disgust or fear or boredom. Okay, so why? Is it because they didn't like the topic? Is they didn't understand some of the words? Are some of the words really powerful when they're spoken out loud? Get them to notice and respond emotionally. And this leads me to step 3, which is encourage curiosity, right? So we made that nice emotional connection. There's no wrong answers. So ask them why some poems or song lyrics are better than others. What is it about them? You can scaffold them towards noticing some of the craft of poetry. And this is kind of the process that you just went through, right? Get them to notice things like the rhymes. When certain words rhyme together, you link them in your mind. You can get them to notice things like alliteration, the sounds that S sounds make, or the hard K sounds. You know, there's a reason why in English we have certain swear words with really hard k, k, k sounds, because the sort of sound itself becomes of sort of violence when you say it out loud. There are poetry and song lyrics that really have amazing imagery. With a few words, they can evoke a picture in your mind, often through things like metaphor and simile, comparing to unlike things that you wouldn't naturally have occurred to you. So this is where you kind of get them to notice some of the craft that makes these things really powerful. And again, you should model this with poems and lyrics that you personally love. Show them how great these poems are, and you then show them your emotional connection to them, and get them to bring poems that they love and do that same kind of exercise. What is it about this song lyric that is so powerful? You're going to analyze it together, right? This is a sort of the I do, and now we're working towards the we do. So you analyze this together, do a lot of we do analyzing together so that they start to feel comfortable. And again, it's really important to do this analysis only after they've made an emotional connection to poetry, once they're on board. Because analysis without any emotional connection can really kill their enthusiasm about poetry. And the analysis really has one goal, right? The analysis is that we are deconstructing the poems or having a look at some of those techniques that make poems so amazing in order for them to produce poems. So they're going to write poems. So deconstruct the techniques in order to bring you to production. Which brings us to our last step, which is now we're going to experiment with writing poems ourselves. And there's a number of key things to keep in mind here. So the first one would be to make sure, again, that this is fun. Okay, we're going to use games and cooperative learning and silliness to make sure that we're bringing down the emotional, the emotional sort of stress and anxiety around writing a perfect poem. It's not always high art. It can be a lot of fun and silly. You can make them meaningful. This is really, really great for teenagers, especially through the kind of topics that you're going to suggest. They really need an outlet for all those powerful emotions that they're feeling, some of the situations that they're experiencing. So you're offering them a great place to do this if you craft the topics. Again, you're going to make it easy for them. Make it easy by scaffolding them through the writing process. You know, give them sentence starters, graphic organizers. Only require really short samples. Don't ask them to do a whole sonnet. Just, you know, even a couple of lines, just practicing rhyming, or a couple of lines practicing alliteration. And see a couple, using a graphic organizer to help them shape the overall structure. We'll have a look at that more in depth after. And finally, choice and challenge. Students are always much more engaged when they have a choice of the kind of poem they want to write or the kind of technique that they want to use. So let them discover the techniques through your deconstruction and let them decide which ones they want to use, right? So in that whole format of deconstruction to construction, encourage them to notice the kind of techniques they really enjoy and what they want to use. So really quickly, here's some ideas for fun. One of the biggest successes I had in my classroom when teaching poetry was using magnetic poetry kits. So I'd bring them to class and let the kids just play around with them, which was a great way to get their creative juices flowing. There was no pressure to write the most perfect poem, but it was, you know, a lot of fun for them. Make it meaningful. I Googled these topics online, but you can see how these are meaningful for students. You know, how a kiss feels, the place where you were born, a smell that brings back memories, intense feelings, being in love, all these kind of things. Writing a poem about having a fever might be kind of fun. Anyway, you can see these online. Easy. I talked about sentence starters and graphic organizers. There's lots and lots of graphic organizers online. Here's one, for example, just to get them started. And again, you can get them to use techniques within this poem, but if they fill this in, they can copy it out and they have written a poem. So you're creating the conditions for success. You're making it fun and easy and enjoyable. So just to recap what we've learned today in the video on poetry. So why should we teach poetry? Well, mostly because poetry is amazing for students and English language learners. It allows them to express themselves emotionally. It's really not very demanding in terms of language. We're talking simple present tense, first person singular, so simple grammar and syntax, and high frequency vocabulary, words that they probably already know. The next thing is you really need to start with yourself. You need to be interested and curious and comfortable with the kind of poetry you're teaching. So connect with your own emotions over the poetry, find things that you really enjoy, learn about it so that you can become a really good model. And again, the most important thing when you're starting is to emphasize the emotional connection. So with yourself and with the students. What is it that you appreciate about it? What kind of emotions do the poems or songs evoke when you hear them? And there's no wrong answers at this point. Keep in mind that we are deconstructing, so the analysis is really with the goal to help students construct. So you can get them to look at poems and understand what's amazing about them, and then choose some techniques to bring into their own writing. And then finally, experiment. So when they're writing their own poems, make it fun, easy, meaningful for them, and give them the choice and challenge them to pull in some of those techniques that they saw. Don't prescribe and tell them you must make sure this poem rhymes or you must use simile in this poem, but ask them to pick a technique that they want to try out today and see if they can put it in. Experiment with it. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to showing you some more concrete techniques in class.